Hey guys, today I'm going to be sharing my review of Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Uncle Tom's Cabin was the best-selling novel of the 19th century and the second best-selling novel book of that century following the Bible. Of course, the phrase bestseller, it's kind of moot at this point. It's thrown around so much, right? So in the first year after it was published, 300,000 copies of the book were sold in the United States, 1 million copies in Great Britain. Evidently, by the way, there's going to be a lot of spoilers in this review. I'm just letting you know. And there's a spoiler right now. So evidently, the death of little Eva affected a lot of people at that time because in 1852, 300 baby girls in Boston alone were given that name. Harriet Beecher Stowe came under criticism and released sort of an explanation book named A Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin, and that was a bestseller. That's how popular Uncle Tom's Cabin was. That the explanation book became a bestseller itself. So according to Stowe's son, so this may or may not be true, probably not. But according to Harriet Beecher Stowe's son, when Abraham Lincoln met her in 1862, Lincoln commented. So this is the little lady who started this great war. Again, it's a cool story. It may or may not be true, probably not. Upon publication, Uncle Tom's Cabin ignited a firestorm of protest from defenders of slavery. Between 20 and 30 anti-Tom books were published. Threatening letters were sent to Stowe, including a package containing a slave's severed ear. By the way, all these things I've been reading, I got them off of Wikipedia. I did some rudimentary research because the main point is, you can say anything you want about Uncle Tom's Cabin. It was an impactful book. You can say all you want about that, but it did it. It brought slavery and the evils of slavery, and even though it was a contrived or whatever attempt at appealing to people's emotions, it could not have been ignored. It was a big deal. The book was so widely read that Sigmund Freud reported a number of patients with sadomasochist tendencies who he believed had been influenced by reading the whipping of slaves in Uncle Tom's Cabin. And another interesting little point they made in the Wikipedia article, before I get to my review of the book, my sort of opinion on the book. So a little anecdote is the first London edition appeared in May of 1852 and sold 200,000 copies. Some of this interest was because of the British antipathy to America. As one prominent writer explained, the evil passions which Uncle Tom gratified in England were not hatred or vengeance of slavery, but national jealousy and national vanity. I think there's definitely some parallels in our modern day to this. It's a great book. It was definitely a great book that did a lot of good, and that cannot be denied. That's history. That's fact. But it kind of resonates, doesn't it, to nowadays? Sometimes people are so want to hate the United States so much that, we haven't heard the end of it, have we? So again, there will be spoilers, but basically my review is that Uncle Tom's Cabin is boring, but good. It's a boring book, but it's good. It's also a very heavy-handed appeal to Christian housewives, obviously. It's also a heavy-handed appeal to make wills, freeing your slaves in case you suddenly die. There's a couple instances of that. And there's also a couple instances of, housewives decrying preachers who were defending slavery. So she definitely, used Christianity to try to, and Christianity was a big deal. So good, she tried to paint Uncle Tom as, a nice Christian. And how can you enslave that? How can you enslave a good Christian person who's perfect? How can you do that, right? So it was very effective, but a lot of people talk bad about religion. You go on Reddit or whatever, and it's popular to hate religion and to talk about how, the Catholic Church, I'm not Catholic, I'm an atheist. I think atheists like, Richard Dawkins and stuff are fighting the good fight, but they're annoying. They become annoying. Atheists are more annoying than Jehovah's Witnesses knocking on your door. There's a lot that Christianity has done for the world. There's that book by Tom Woods, how the Catholic Church built civilization. I'm not even Catholic, but I agree, and definitely this book was, heavily relied on Christianity. Although I think it was Thomas Sowell who said, Christians sometimes did believe in slavery, they just didn't believe in enslaving other Christians. That's the general summary of their stance. But anyways, so I do think that religion did good, and that sometimes we need to acknowledge that religion is sometimes good. So anyways, ultimately, this book was about a man who was, I think, as the book put it, had nothing in the world except his religious convictions. The one thing that no evil master could take from him was his belief in God. It's a guy who is obviously in poverty, captivity, and being tortured. But you know what? He still won. He still won the battle because he stuck to his beliefs, and he stuck to Jesus. Seems kind of dumb, but it's poetic. It's poetic, really. So, anyways, this book really did get to me. Even today, it got to me. The mistreatment of blacks, and the little point that she made that really got to me was when she explained it. So there's this evil, like at the end, everything's going well, everything's, Tom is going to be free. And then suddenly his master dies. And suddenly they have to sell all their estate, including all their slaves. And suddenly Tom, who we thought was going to be freed, well, he's going to have to be sold to like the most bad person in the world, just a guy named Legree, a slave master who had a little, plantation in a swamp in Louisiana. And this Legree guy basically would buy slaves and had some slave women as his sex slaves. And that really got to me because statistically speaking, that was probably the case. In fact, statistically speaking, it was probably really, a popular thing, right? So that part just got to me. Like, can you imagine that? That would suck. So anyways, that's an example of the book still to this day resonating. So she clearly, Harriet Beecher Stowe, one of her kids, died young, and she clearly still mourned the loss of her child, It's evidenced by the death of little Eva. That's one example. And of course, there was a scene where Eliza, the runaway slave, she had a little black kid, and they were saved by, I believe, Quakers. And the Quakers lend the little kid their dead, deceased, child's clothing, that it may do some good, and that's the loss, the grief, the psychology behind this book. That was very apparent. That I mean, you have to realize it's a great book too. Like, I was bored. Again, I was bored by it, but you fall in love with it. It really is kind of an escapist book. You get to live in somebody else's shoe. You get to, we are so different. That an Instagram model is so different from a rice farmer in Vietnam or something. We live such different lives. We get to escape through movies and media, but I don't know. It's hard to articulate. But like the plot of Uncle Buck, right? One of the little parts in Uncle Buck is he has to like deal with a party clown who comes home drunk. If I was to write some fiction, I wouldn't add that because that's not part of my universe. I'm not that kind of guy who has to deal with that ever. But maybe that resonates with 1980s or whatever Americans, 1990s, John Candy fans. Well, that's not my universe. Well, here in Harriet Beecher Stowe, she lives in a whole new universe full of slavery and mothers being torn from their kids. And although she was in the North, and a lot of Southerners accused her that she didn't actually know what she was talking about, but she definitely, I think she did, and she definitely lives in a different reality where children die and housewives need to debate with their husbands, and housewives have a voice, and they appeal to their husbands, and they try to nag their husbands to do this or do that, and religion is a big deal. It's good to escape every once in a while. So, um, and also another weird thing is, she's like a housewife. Like, it's not like even she's a Victorian housewife, maybe not Victorian, um, but a colonial housewife. So even like your stereotypical 1950s housewife is too liberal for her, right? And yet somehow she's able to describe like action scenes. Like, she wrote a novel and she has action in it, and it's pretty good. Like, easy to read, descriptive sort of parts of action that you can follow with, right? Um, that's a little interesting. There's one scene where Uncle Tom. So the main part, right? So Uncle Tom, that's a derogatory term, right? It's somebody who loves their oppressors, who doesn't stand up for themselves, who's a pushover. And so there's a scene where Uncle Tom has a chance to kill this evil epitome of evil Legree, and he doesn't do it. And so people are like, well, then you're an Uncle Tom if you don't do that. But I read that, and clearly, it's clear. It's not a criticism on Uncle Tom, like on black, because he was black. He did it because he was Christian. It's clearly a criticism on. I mean, it's not a criticism. She paints it as a virtue. But if you want to criticize it, you don't have to criticize blacks who turn the other cheek. You have to criticize gullible Christians. Like, that's the way I saw it. Uncle Tom didn't kill that guy first and foremost because he was a Christian, not because he was a black who loved his master. And of course, this is like one of the most dissected pieces of literature ever. So obviously somebody has made that observation before me. Looking at the Wikipedia article, it says Stowe intended Tom to be a noble hero and a Christ-like figure who, like Jesus at his crucifixion, forgives the people responsible for his death. The false stereotype of Tom as a subversive fool who bows down to the white man, and the resulting derogatory term Uncle Tom resulted from staged Tom shows, which sometimes replace Tom's grim death with an upbeat ending where Tom causes his oppressors to see the error of their ways, and they all reconcile happily. Stowe had no control over these shows and their alternation of her story. So I'm not the first to make this observation. So it's not the book's fault that Uncle Tom, like the phrase Uncle Tom of a black person who loves their oppressors, came after she wrote the book. It wasn't from the book. And if you read the book, that's not what you get at all. If anything, if you read the book, it would be like, yeah, Christians who turn the other cheek are Uncle Toms. Moral absolutists are Uncle Toms. But again, well, I've made my point. Another few interesting parts. I found it interesting that in the book they mention Horace Mann as a lawyer. I wonder if it's the same, Horace Mann. It probably is. But I don't know. I guess I should have researched that. They mentioned the Haiti Revolution, and it appears to me that she really thought blacks would revolt eventually. So that's very interesting. That the pressure was on. The characters. Okay, so here's another criticism. The characters were one-dimensional. Yes, they were one-dimensional, but she included enough characters to try to cover all dimensions. And besides, yeah, they were one-dimensional, but she's trying to make a point. Okay, she's trying to make a point about morality. The way I see it, it's like she baked a banana bread. She baked banana bread, and it tastes, and people criticize her for not tasting like a blueberry muffin. It's like, no, this woman's baking a banana bread. She's, I don't know, she's serving banana bread to you, and you're penalizing it because it doesn't taste like a blueberry muffin. It's not supposed to taste like a blueberry muffin. She was going for a certain style, and you have to just contextualize. You can state, yeah, I don't like that style, but you can't be like, well, she failed at, making, all the characters are one-dimensional. Yeah, she's trying to make a point. So, again, it was boring, but it was good. Also, the character, the little black girl, there was a little black girl. What was it? Tammy? Zappy? Timmy? Tammy or something. So, this little black girl, other people say, well, the characters were one-dimensional. Yeah, for the most part, yes, absolutely. Although there were some characters who changed their mind, repented, like Zambo and Jambo or something. Django? No, Zambo and Lambo. It was some weird crap like that. I mean, you really feel nervous just reading this in public, because the connotation of all of these characters has changed over time so much. I live in New York, and I didn't want to bring this in the subway, just in the off chance, someone would be offended that I was reading a book with the word Uncle Tom. You know, people are dumb sometimes, but the Zambo crap, that doesn't help. But whatever. There was that little girl, and she was a good. I thought, yeah, everyone is one dimensional until I got to that girl, because it was a case of, so she was a little slave girl who would steal and lie, and her owner was a good Christian woman who wanted to change her ways and make her not steal and be honest, but she would still steal, and she would get caught in a lie. And they're like, why are you doing this? And she was like, I can't help it. And I thought that was very deep about human nature and not at all one-dimensional. But of course, there's the stereotypical part where she finally repents. So, but there's a lot of people, I don't know, man, a lot of people who can't help their flaws, right? But that was just a good little part, a good little character. So again, in conclusion, it was boring, but it was good. And after I read it, I missed it. I missed that book somehow, even though I was bored. It kept me entertained, throughout the whole thing. And the ending was really good, I thought. You go and it's like a scene. It's like directed. You can picture it in your mind. Tom is getting tortured and he's killed from the whippings or whatever. And scene, blackout. And then it's like a carriage ride. Carriage rides through the hill, and a young man, and it's like, wait a second, that young man is Master George, the son of the first Master George who owned Tom. So basically, the dad died who owned Tom. So the dad was going bankrupt, so he had to sell Tom, and so he sold Tom. Tom got passed around, and then his son, now a man, came to pick him up and buy his freedom back. But he's a little too late, a few days too late. I thought that was a very good ending. That was a really good ending. I do want to mention too, I've been to the Harriet Beecher Stowe house in Connecticut, and it's right next to the Mark Twain house. And from my experience, what a liberal place. Like, I don't know if it's whose fault it is, but the narrative we got from that was pretty leftist, and it's kind of, but whatever, they were nice. Who cares? It's not a big deal. But it does kind of piss me off though. Like, I remember I went to the place in North Carolina where the Wright brothers flew for the first time, and they had flight. So I have never heard more bashing of the Wright brothers than in near the monument of the Wright brothers. They're talking about how they were probably not the first, how they spent the rest of their lives suing everyone for their patent, how they, this and that. It's like, come on, man, have some respect. You're at their monument. Not that I'm saying there should be a law or there should be a moral outcry on Twitter. I'm just saying, like, I don't know, man, like it like even in the Margaret Mitchell house, the tour guide dude, who, by the way, was awesome. Like, I want to give that guy a review. I still haven't, but that guy was awesome. But they still were like, hey, we should tell both sides. Come on, man. Like, I don't know about that. They're great people who did consequential stuff. Have a little respect at their monument. So anyways, there you have it. Those are my insights and opinions. Please, if you have any retorts, please write them in the comments. Next, I will be reviewing a book about a biography on John Quincy Adams. Now, if you think Uncle Tom is gullible, boy, you're yelling at the books because you have all this buildup about John Quincy Adams being like the perfect man for the presidency, and then he gets that chance to become president, and everything breaks down. So thank you. Please subscribe, and I'll be talking to you very, very soon.